Deputy Defense Secretary William Lynn has a message for the defense industry. We're in this together. Pentagon will have to come up with $400 billion in budget cuts over the next 12 years under the president's plan. This morning, Lynn told defense contractors at an investors conference what they must do to help. William Lynn's here with us in business today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Happy to be here.
Well, thanks for coming in. $400 billion over 12 years. Secretary Gates has been sort of upfront about wanting to take the lead and acknowledging that those cuts need to be made before he was mandated to do so. Is there a chance that the cuts are actually going to be bigger than $400 billion?
Well, the president has set out a goal of $400 billion cuts over 12 years, as you described, but the two next steps, one is for the department to undertake a comprehensive review and understand exactly what choices are incumbent on that newer level of resources. What missions do we scale back? What does the force structure look like? What are the weapons programs? How do we adjust our operating? And then second, of course, we're engaged with Congress in terms of setting budget levels for a much wider variety for all the departments, and we need to see the outcome of the results of those negotiations. So
you're still working with that number at this point, the $400 billion over 12 years?
We're starting a comprehensive plan with that number in mind.
You know, we just ran a report here at Bloomberg, our reporter from BGov, that unit, running the cost essentially of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden over the past 10 years' time. They came up with $2 trillion as the cost to the U.S. taxpayer. Economists we talked to say it might be even upwards of that, $2.5 trillion. How does that funding, that allocation change now that Osama bin Laden is dead?
Well, I haven't seen that number, but I think the death of Osama bin Laden is an enormous positive achievement. As the president said, bringing bin Laden to justice is a long-term goal of two administrations. It's an important victory, but
does it change that review process that you're talking about undergoing?
There are still many threats out there. We're still engaged in Afghanistan. We're drawing down our forces in Iraq. And it's those things that are really going to be those immediate threats, and then what kind of longer-term contingencies we need to plan for that are really going to drive the decisions on defense resources. And
in addition to those two engagements that you referenced in Afghanistan and in Iraq, a report today from Secretary Gates saying the U.S. has spent about $750 million on the Libya conflict, which is a NATO action.
That's right.
What have you modeled for there in terms of cost?
Well, the cost, as the Secretary said, is
At this point,
$750 million. The biggest piece of that cost was the initial strikes and the cost of the missiles in those strikes. The month-to-month operating costs are in the middle tens of millions per year at this point.
And you're projecting along that?
That's what they are right now, and that's what we're accommodating at this point.
What does it cost per day? Do you know?
Well, if you figure 40 or 50 million a month, it's a little more than $1 million a day.
Now, in the conversation that you had here in New York, obviously our audience is looking at the traditional defense spending, the allocations towards the defense companies we just put up on screen. But you've lately been focusing very much on this new front. That is cyber attacks and the vulnerability that you see in this country. You've written about it, you've spoken about it. Where do we need to be changing spending allocation? I mean, what does it need to be going towards to protect us from that threat?
Well, I mean, as we adjust our defense spendings, there's some things that we'll spend less on, but even...
What are we going to need to spend more on?
Exactly. There are going to be things that we also need to spend more on, and I think cybersecurity, defending our networks, is one of those. It's clear that any future conflict is going to have a cyber dimension to it, and even without a conflict, there's many cyber... There are thousands of attempts to intrude on our networks every day, and we need to ensure that we're protecting those networks. And we need to support the Department of Homeland Security in protecting other government networks as well as our critical infrastructure. Yeah,
and I'm looking, the reason I asked you about that is I'm looking at remarks that you made at an RSA conference talking about cybersecurity. Right. And you referenced what happened at the NASDAQ, right. the hacking there. Right. You referenced what happened to Google. And certainly, so much of the private sector is concerned about that. I mean, do you see those types of vulnerabilities and attacks as the challenge of a nation state? Are we talking about just corporate hacking? I mean, for you you to talk about it as a defense concern makes it sound like that is a matter of state security, not just corporate issues.
Well, I mean, there are certain things that would be corporate, certain are individual, and certain are national. The things
But you specifically named those
yes.
vulnerabilities at Google and at the NASDAQ.
Well, what I think is a national concern is the critical infrastructure that supports the economy and indeed supports the military. So I'm thinking of the transportation network, the power grid, the information technology backbone, the financial sector. Those are core sectors that need to be protected for the security and the economy of the nation.
All right. Well, it's something we're going to continue to track. Thank you so much for coming in.